The Allied breakout from Normandy in late July 1944 created a military situation no one had fully anticipated. Operation Cobra shattered German defenses, and suddenly American, British, and Canadian forces were racing across France faster than anyone had planned. The problem was simple but catastrophic. The further they advanced, the longer their supply lines stretched. Every mile forward meant another mile that fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies had to travel from the beaches of Normandy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In August 1944, despite the collapsing front, German generals maintained a peculiar confidence. They had studied Napoleon's disastrous march on Moscow. They understood the tyranny of distance. Their military academies taught that logistics determined battles more than tactics. When they looked at maps showing Allied forces 300, then 400 miles from their supply bases, they smiled. Let the Americans advance, they thought. Let them outrun their supplies. Then the Wehrmacht would counterattack and drive them back into the sea. Nazi ideology added another layer to German confidence. Intelligence reports told them that a large portion of American supply troops were black soldiers. To German officers trained in racial pseudoscience, this was proof of American desperation and incompetence. They believed black soldiers lacked the intelligence, discipline, and courage for military operations. The idea that these men would be responsible for supplying the Allied advance seemed like a gift from fate. Surely these inferior troops would fail, and the American advance would collapse. What German generals did not fully understand was the staggering difference in industrial capacity. In 1944, the United States produced more trucks in 1 month than Germany produced in an entire year. American factories operated 3 shifts daily, staffed by women and minorities who had entered the workforce when men went to war. The Ford Motor Company alone could produce a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. German Motors manufactured not just trucks, but tanks, aircraft engines, and weapons systems. This industrial tsunami was about to crash into the Wehrmacht's carefully reasoned logistics calculations. The situation on the ground seemed impossible. The Allied advance moved so fast that it left behind destroyed bridges, cratered roads, and bombed rail lines. The French rail system, deliberately targeted by Allied bombers before D-Day, was almost completely unusable. Every supply had to move by truck. The distance from Cherbourg to the advancing front lines was farther than from Berlin to Paris. Fuel trucks burned fuel to deliver fuel. Mathematics seemed impossible. Klaus Richter was born in 1902 in Prussia, the son of a career army officer who had fought in the Franco-Prussian War. He entered the military academy at age 16, just in time to miss World War I, a fact that haunted him his entire career. He studied logistics and supply at the Kriegakademie, where instructors used the failure of German supply lines in 1914 and 18 as case studies. Richter learned that ammunition shortages, fuel problems, and poor logistics had cost Germany the previous war. He became obsessed with efficiency, with the perfect movement of supplies from factory to front line. Richter joined the Nazi Party in 1933, not out of passionate belief, but because career advancement required it. He adopted the racial ideology because it was expected, because it made sense within the closed system of Nazi thinking, and because it justified Germany's ambitions. By 1944, he was a general major responsible for Wehrmacht supply operations in France. He was good at his job, managing to keep German units supplied despite Allied air superiority and dwindling resources. He took pride in his efficiency, in making every liter of fuel count, in stretching inadequate resources to their limit. The Falaise Pocket in August 1944 was a catastrophe. Allied forces surrounded German units, and the pocket became a killing ground. Richter's supply columns were destroyed by Allied aircraft. His carefully maintained logistics network dissolved into chaos. On August 19, 1944, his vehicle was hit by American artillery. He survived, but was captured by soldiers from the U.S. Third Army. As they led him away, he saw the roads clogged with American vehicles, not fleeing in disorder, but advancing in an endless stream. It was his first glimpse that something was fundamentally different about this enemy. Richter expected rough treatment. German propaganda had portrayed Americans as gangsters and criminals in uniform. Instead, the MPs who guarded him were professional and correct. They gave him water. They allowed him to keep his personal items. They loaded him into a truck heading west, back toward the Normandy coast. But it was during this truck ride that Richter began to see something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The roads of France in August 1944 were the greatest logistics operation in human history. Richter's truck moved slowly, not because of damage or inefficiency, but because the roads were packed with American vehicles. Trucks passed in both directions, some heading east loaded with supplies, others returning west for another load. Richter tried to count them. He gave up after an hour. The stream never stopped. Even at night, the convoys continued, headlights blazing, with no fear of Luftwaffe attack, because the Luftwaffe had been destroyed. What shocked Richter most was the drivers. Most were black soldiers. Men he had been taught to view as racially inferior were driving these trucks with skill and confidence. They moved in organized convoys, maintaining spacing, following traffic control procedures that seemed more efficient than German systems. These were not defeated, demoralized men. These were professional soldiers doing a complex job with apparent ease. The cognitive dissonance began to crack Richter's worldview. At a traffic control point, Richter's guards stopped for coffee. He saw the signs. Red ball route, stay on the ball, keep 'em rolling. He saw the red balls painted on trucks and road markers. A guard explained this was the Red Ball Express, a dedicated supply route moving supplies from the coast to Patton's army. The guard spoke about it casually, as if building a 400-mile supply highway across destroyed France was routine. Richter calculated in his head, if what he was seeing was real, the Americans were moving more tonnage in a day than the Wehrmacht moved in a week. When Richter's truck finally reached the Cherbourg area, he saw something that defied comprehension. The beaches and fields were covered with supplies. Mountains of crates, barrels, and boxes stretched as far as he could see. Cranes unloaded ships at the docks. Tank transporters carried new Sherman tanks toward the front. Fuel dumps held millions of gallons. This was not an army barely holding on. This was an army with resources to waste. Richter thought of German soldiers scavenging battlefield wrecks for parts, of panzers immobilized for lack of fuel, of units on half rations. Here, American soldiers casually tossed aside damaged equipment because replacing it was easier than repairing it. The POW camp was newly established in a converted German bunker complex. The irony was not lost on Richter. He was imprisoned in fortifications Germany had built to stop this invasion. That first night, he lay on a cot and listened to the sound of truck engines. The Red Ball Express never stopped. Even in darkness, the convoys rolled. Richter had spent 20 years studying military logistics. He had written papers on supply efficiency. He had lectured younger officers on the mathematics of the possible, and now he was confronting the reality that everything he knew was wrong. The Americans were doing the impossible, and they were doing it with men his ideology told him could not succeed. Richter's first full week as a prisoner of war systematically destroyed his understanding of military operations. Each day brought new revelations that contradicted everything he had learned at the Kriegsakademie. On his second morning, guards served breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, bread with butter, and real coffee. Richter ate slowly, calculating. This single meal contained more protein than a German soldier received in 3 days. And this was for prisoners. What did American soldiers eat? POW labor was permitted under Geneva Conventions, and Richter was assigned to work at a supply depot. His logistics expertise was useful even in captivity. The Americans needed help organizing and cataloging captured German equipment. This assignment gave Richter an insider's view of American logistics that few German officers would ever see. What he witnessed was both humiliating and enlightening. Richter began keeping a mental log. He counted trucks passing the depot. On an average day, he counted over 800 vehicles on the Red Ball route visible from his work area. Each truck carried 5 tons of supplies. Simple mathematics, 4,000 tons per day on just this one section of road. Multiply by the length of the route, add the other supply routes. The numbers became astronomical. The Wehrmacht's entire supply operation for Army Group West had never moved this much material even before D-Day. The Americans were doing it as routine, day after day, week after week. The Red Ball Express drivers came through the depot for rest breaks, vehicle maintenance, and load assignments. Richter worked alongside them, sorting equipment, organizing supplies. These were the men he had been taught to despise. Instead, he found professional soldiers who took pride in their work. Staff Sergeant James Jackson from Alabama became someone Richter interacted with regularly. Jackson drove a GMC truck he called Alabama Special. He had driven from Normandy to the German border and back 17 times. He knew every crater, every bypass, every dangerous curve. He could change a tire in 12 minutes and perform basic engine repairs in the dark. Through conversations with Jackson and other black soldiers, Richter learned about American segregation. These men could not eat in the same restaurants as white Americans back home. They faced discrimination and violence. Many couldn't vote. Yet here they were, essential to the Allied war effort, performing with excellence under conditions that would have broken lesser units. Jackson told Richter about driving 20-hour shifts, about German artillery falling near the roads, about trucks going over cliffs on mountain passes, about friends who died when their trucks hit mines. Through all of it, the convoys kept moving because stopping meant American soldiers at the front would run out of ammunition. One afternoon, Richter watched American mechanics completely replace a truck engine in 4 hours. The truck had thrown a rod, destroying the engine block. Instead of trying to repair it, which would take weeks, the mechanics simply unbolted the destroyed engine, lifted it out with a portable crane, dropped in a new engine from their supply, connected the systems, and had the truck back on the road the same day. Richter thought about German vehicle maintenance, where mechanics spent days fabricating parts because no replacements existed. American abundance made repair unnecessary. They were simply replaced. Working with captured German vehicles, Richter saw the fatal flaw in German logistics. Germany had dozens of different truck models from different manufacturers. Each required different parts. A fuel pump from an Opel Blitz would not fit a Mercedes-Benz. The Wehrmacht had to stock thousands of different parts, and shortages of one specific part could immobilize an entire unit. American trucks, GMC and Studebaker, were standardized. Parts were interchangeable. One spare parts depot could service thousands of vehicles. It was elegant, it was efficient, it was everything German engineering claimed to be but was not. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The depot kitchen fascinated and appalled Richter. American Army cooks prepared hot meals for thousands daily. They had industrial stoves, refrigerated trucks for fresh food, and supplies that seemed endless. Richter saw them throw away leftovers, perfectly good food tossed into garbage bins because Army regulations required it. He thought about German civilians eating grass soup. He thought about soldiers on the Eastern Front starving in winter. And here, American cooks threw away more food in a day than a German battalion ate in a week. The waste was not cruelty, it was indifference. They had so much that waste did not matter. One September morning, a truck delivered cases of Coca-Cola to the depot. Richter watched American soldiers casually grab cold bottles from an ice chest. They drank them quickly and tossed the empties. Sergeant Jackson offered Richter a bottle. It was cold, sweet, and completely unnecessary. This was not water. This was not nutrition. This was a pleasure. The American military was supplying luxury items to men 400 miles from the coast during active combat operations. Richter held the empty bottle and understood something profound. America was not just richer than Germany. America existed in a different economic reality entirely. The depot had a medical station. Richter, suffering from an infected cut on his hand, was sent there for treatment. An American medic cleaned the wound, applied antibiotic powder, something German doctors rarely had, and bandaged it professionally. The medic used supplies casually, without the careful rationing Richter had seen in German field hospitals. There were boxes of morphine, plasma containers, surgical instruments, and antibiotics stacked on shelves. The medic mentioned that supply trucks delivered medical equipment weekly. German field hospitals went months without resupply. Richter thought about soldiers who died from infected wounds because no antibiotics were available. He thought about amputations performed without anesthesia. And here, a POW with a minor cut received better care than German soldiers at the front. Lieutenant Charles Morrison was the depot commander, a logistics officer from Ohio who had studied supply chain management at university before the war. Morrison sometimes spoke with Richter, interested in comparing German and American logistics systems. These conversations were professional, almost academic. Morrison explained the Red Ball Express system, dedicated routes, one-way traffic, military police at every intersection, maintenance depots every 50 miles, rest stations with hot food and coffee. The system moved 12,000 tons daily at peak operation. Morrison showed Richter maps and charts. He was proud of the accomplishment, as he should have been. It was the greatest logistics operation in military history. During one of these conversations, Richter asked the question that had been growing in his mind. How? How do you do this? The distance, the destruction, the scale, it should be impossible. Morrison looked at him for a long moment and said, "It's not about how, it's about why. We have to. Our soldiers need supplies, so we supply them. We have trucks, we have the fuel, we have the men willing to drive 20 hours a day, so we do it. That's the difference between your army and ours. You do what's efficient. We do what's necessary. And because we have enough, what's necessary is also possible." That night, Richter lay on his cot and did mathematics. He calculated total American truck production. He estimated fuel consumption. He counted the trucks he had seen and extrapolated across all Allied supply routes. The numbers were staggering. America was producing more military vehicles in a month than Germany's entire pre-war stock. The fuel alone, millions of gallons per day, exceeded Germany's total production capacity. This was not a war between armies. This was a war between economic systems, and Germany had lost before the first shot was fired. The only question had been how long it would take for the inevitable to become obvious. In early October, news reached the POW camp that American forces had reached the German border. Richter heard this from guards, from newspapers, from radio broadcasts that prisoners were occasionally allowed to hear. The Wehrmacht had retreated hundreds of miles. The impossible American supply lines had not collapsed. Instead, they had sustained multiple armies in continuous offensive operations for 2 months. Patton's Third Army alone had advanced farther and faster than any army in modern military history, and it had done so supplied by the Red Ball Express. Richter spent days trying to understand how this had happened. According to every logistics calculation he knew, the American advance should have stalled by mid-August. Supply lines should have broken down. Fuel shortages should have immobilized entire divisions. Instead, American forces had crossed France, liberated Paris, reached the German frontier, and were preparing to cross the Rhine. The only explanation was that American industrial capacity was so vast that standard logistics calculations did not apply. They simply had too much. Enough to waste, enough to lose trucks to breakdowns and still have thousands more. Enough to deliver Coca-Cola to the front lines during active combat. One October evening, Sergeant Jackson's convoy stopped at the depot for overnight maintenance. Jackson found Richter sorting supply crates and sat down nearby, smoking a cigarette. They had developed an odd relationship, not friendship exactly, but mutual respect between professionals. Richter finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "How did you do it? The advance should have been impossible." Jackson smiled, tired but satisfied. "Impossible, man. They told us everything was impossible. Told us we couldn't drive in combat zones. Told us the roads were too damaged. Told us we'd break down. Told us we'd get lost. Told us we couldn't keep multiple armies supplied across hundreds of miles. We did it anyway. You know why? Because American soldiers needed bullets and fuel. So we drove. We drove through artillery fire. We drove when German planes strafed the roads. We drove when we hadn't slept in 2 days. We drove because stopping meant Americans died. That's how we did it. We cared more about getting it done than whether it was supposed to be possible." Richter sat quietly for a moment, then said something he never thought he would say. "We were taught that black soldiers were inferior, incapable of military excellence." Jackson laughed, a bitter sound. "Yeah, we know what you were taught. Same thing we're taught back home, that we're inferior, that we can't do what white men do. The funny thing is, we're over here proving everyone wrong. We're driving the trucks that beat your army. We're the reason Patton reached Germany. And when we go home, we still won't be able to vote in half the states. Still won't be able to eat in the same restaurants. Still won't be treated equally. But we'll know what we did. We'll know we were essential. You can't take that away." Richter felt something break inside him. His entire worldview, the racial hierarchy, the assumed superiority, the confidence in German excellence, all of it was built on lies. Here sat a man who could not vote in his own country, who faced discrimination and violence, who was considered second class by his own government. And this man had just helped defeat the Wehrmacht. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. Richter started writing in a small notebook the Red Cross had provided. At first, just observations and calculations. But gradually, the entries became more personal, more reflective. He wrote, "October 8, 1944. The American army reached Aachen today, the city where Charlemagne was crowned, German soil. They did this supplied by men we were taught to dismiss. I have been a fool. We have all been fools. October 12, 1944. Watched Sergeant Jackson organize a convoy today. 15 trucks, each with different cargo requirements. He managed fuel priorities, timing, route selection, and maintenance scheduling in his head. This is a man Alabama says is not smart enough to vote. What does this say about Alabama? What does it say about Germany? October 19, 1944. The waste continues to appall me. Today, they discarded a truck transmission that could have been repaired. They simply installed a new one. We would have spent 2 weeks fixing the old one because we had no replacement. They have so many replacements that fixing is not worth the time. This is not inefficient. This is abundance beyond anything I understood was possible. As October turned to November, Richter learned that American forces planned Christmas celebrations even in combat zones. The Red Ball Express would deliver Christmas dinner to soldiers at the front. Turkey, ham, all the traditional foods. In December, in the middle of a war. 400 miles from the coast, while fighting. The logistics alone would have been impossible for the Wehrmacht under peacetime conditions. The Americans were doing it as a matter of course. November 27, 1944. I have spent 3 months as a prisoner. In that time, I have learned more than in 20 years as an officer. Everything I was taught about military logistics was correct in theory, but irrelevant in practice, because it assumed similar resources on both sides. Everything I was taught about racial superiority was simply false. The Negro soldiers of the Red Ball Express have accomplished what our general staff declared impossible. They have done so under conditions that would have broken German units. They have done so while facing discrimination in their own country. This is not just a military defeat. This is a philosophical defeat. Nazi ideology has been proven false by truck drivers from Alabama and Georgia. We mocked their supply lines. We assumed they would fail. We were wrong about everything. Richter spent nearly 2 years as a prisoner of war. The camp population swelled after Germany's surrender in May 1945, then gradually decreased as prisoners were processed and repatriated. Richter was not released until April 1946. The delay was partly bureaucratic, partly because the Allies were screening officers for war crimes, and partly because there was simply nowhere to send millions of German POWs. Germany was occupied, destroyed, and barely functioning. The Allies kept many prisoners working on reconstruction because releasing them would create a humanitarian catastrophe. Before his release, Richter sought out Sergeant Jackson one last time. Jackson's unit was being reassigned back to the United States, their war service complete. Richter found him at the motor pool, supervising final vehicle inspections before the trucks were shipped home or transferred to occupation forces. They stood in the spring sunshine, an odd pair, a German general and a black sergeant who had helped defeat him. "I wanted to thank you," Richter said awkwardly in his accented English, "for teaching me, for showing me I was wrong." Jackson looked at him with tired eyes. "I didn't teach you anything, General. You just finally opened your eyes and saw what was real. That's on you, not me." "What will you do? When will you return to America?" Jackson sighed. "Go back to Alabama. Try to buy some land. Maybe open a garage. I know trucks pretty well now." He laughed without humor. "Try to vote, if they let me. Try to be treated like a man, like a veteran, like someone who helped win a war. We'll see how that goes." Richter held out his hand. Jackson shook it. Then Richter did something that surprised them both. He unpinned the iron cross from his uniform, one of the few possessions he had kept throughout captivity, and offered it to Jackson. "I cannot wear this anymore. It represents things I no longer believe. But you earned it, more than I ever did." Jackson stared at the medal, then shook his head. "I can't take that, General. That's your history, even if you're ashamed of it. Besides, I got something better." He pointed to the Red Ball Express patch on his shoulder. "This right here, this is what I'm proud of. This is what I'll tell my grandchildren about. We kept 'em rolling. We beat the impossible. We did that." Richter nodded, understanding. He kept the medal, but would never wear it again. Instead, Jackson gave him something else, a small Red Ball Express patch removed from an old uniform jacket. "Here, you keep this. Remember what really won the war. Not generals or tactics, truck drivers and supply sergeants, regular folks doing impossible things because they had to." The train from France to Germany in April 1946 moved slowly through a landscape of devastation. Every major city Richter passed showed the scars of Allied bombing. Cologne was rubble, Frankfurt was rubble, Munich was rubble. The cathedral cities, the industrial centers, the cultural capitals, all reduced to broken stone and twisted metal. Germans called it the Stunde Null, 0 hour, the moment when everything had to begin again from nothing. At the border, Richter saw American supply trucks still running their routes, now delivering food and reconstruction materials to occupied Germany. The Red Ball Express had officially ended in November 1944, but the system it pioneered continued. The trucks that had supplied the destruction now supply the reconstruction. The symmetry was almost poetic. Richter's family had lived in a villa outside Munich. His father's military pension had afforded them a comfortable life before the war. Now, approaching on foot because trains ran irregularly and only for short distances, Richter saw that half of Munich simply no longer existed. The streets he remembered were gone, the buildings were gone, landmarks he had known since childhood were rubble. His villa stood, but barely. The roof partially collapsed, the windows were empty frames. The garden was overgrown. His wife, Margarita, was living in what had been the kitchen, the only room with an intact roof. She was 44, but looked 60. 2 years of near starvation and constant stress had aged her terribly. Their reunion was emotional but strained. Richter had written letters, but mail was irregular. Margarita had not known if he was alive until 6 months ago. They held each other and wept, but there was a distance between them. 2 years of separate hells that could not be quickly bridged. That first night, Margarita told him what had happened to their family. Their son, Friedrich, had been killed at Stalingrad in 1943. He was 19. Their daughter, Anna, had survived the bombing of Munich, but had been assaulted by soldiers. She did not say which army, and Richter did not ask. She was now working for the American occupation authorities, which brought shame from some neighbors, but also brought food, which mattered more than honor now. Margarita's parents had died in the firebombing of Dresden. Richter's brother had been killed on the Western Front in 1944. Margarita's sister had starved to death in Berlin during the final Soviet siege. Of their extended family of 23 people, 11 were dead. This was not unusual. This was typical. Every German family had lost someone. Most had lost many. Richter unpacked his small bag of possessions. He showed Margarita the Red Ball Express patch. He showed her his notebook filled with observations and calculations. He showed her American cigarettes, worth more than money in the ruins of Germany. He showed her a bar of soap, a luxury now beyond the reach of ordinary Germans. But the real thing he brought back was knowledge. Knowledge that Germany had been defeated not by betrayal or bad luck, but by simple economic reality. Knowledge that the Nazi ideology he had accepted was not just morally wrong, but factually false. Knowledge that the war had been unwinnable from the start because Germany never understood the scale of American industrial power. Margarita asked what the camps had been like. Richter told her about the food, the medical care, the relative comfort. She listened in stunned silence. Then she spoke, her voice sharp with bitter anger. You ate eggs and bacon while we ate potato peels. You slept in beds while we hid in basements during bombing raids. You were safe while we died. Richter had no answer. It was true. He had been safer as a POW than his wife had been as a civilian. The guilt was crushing. But worse was knowing why. Because America could afford to treat prisoners well while simultaneously destroying Germany. Because abundance made mercy possible. Because Germany had entered a war it could never win against an opponent it had never truly understood. Word spread that General-Major Richter had returned. Some neighbors welcomed him with relief, a familiar face from before the catastrophe. Others avoided him. Some blamed Wehrmacht officers for continuing a hopeless war. Some blamed them for losing. Some blamed them for starting it. The social fabric of Germany was torn, and everyone was looking for someone to blame besides themselves. An old neighbor, Herr Vogel, confronted Richter in the street. You generals knew we were losing. Why didn't you stop it? Why did you let it go on until everything was destroyed? Richter wanted to explain the complexity, the fear of Hitler, the hope that new weapons would change the situation, the difficulty of stopping once momentum carried you forward. But he just said, "We were fools. We believed our own propaganda." By the time we understood the truth, it was too late. Within weeks, Richter was approached by American occupation authorities. They needed Germans with logistics expertise to help organize the distribution of food aid, to rebuild infrastructure, to make the trains run again. Richter's knowledge of German transportation networks and his fluent English made him valuable. The work paid in occupation currency and came with rations, real food, not the starvation diet most Germans survived on. Some called him a collaborator. Richter did not care. He had spent 2 years watching American logistics in action. He knew how to organize supply distribution efficiently. He knew that German civilians were starving and that American food aid was all that stood between survival and mass famine. He worked with American officers to establish distribution centers, to prioritize routes, and to allocate scarce resources. The irony was not lost on him. He was using lessons learned from the Red Ball Express to feed the people the Red Ball Express had helped defeat. His daughter Anna was 21, thin and hard in ways that broke his heart. She worked as a translator at American headquarters in Munich. She spoke excellent English, learned in school before the war. She was professional, efficient, and emotionally distant. One evening, Richter tried to connect with her, to understand what she had experienced. "The soldiers who hurt you," he began awkwardly, "were they—" "Does it matter?" Anna interrupted. "German, Russian, American, French, there were soldiers everywhere and no law. It happened. I survived. Many didn't. That's the end of the story. I'm sorry I wasn't here to protect you." Anna laughed bitterly. "You were safer than we were. You had food and shelter and doctors. We had bombs and hunger and men with guns who took what they wanted. Don't apologize for being lucky. Anna, I learned things in the camp about why we lost, about what the regime was really." "I don't care," Anna said flatly. "I don't care about ideology or military strategy or lessons learned. I care about food and safety and maybe someday having a life that isn't about survival. The Americans have those things. The Americans give me those things. So I work for the Americans.
That's my lesson. That's the only lesson that matters now. Richter realized that the transformation he had undergone meant nothing to his daughter. She had learned her own lessons, harder and more immediate than his. The luxury of reflection was available only to those not fighting daily to survive. Over the next few years, Richter worked on reconstruction projects throughout Bavaria. He helped organize the logistics for the Marshall Plan, the massive American aid program that poured billions into rebuilding Western Europe. Once again, he found himself amazed by American abundance. They had just spent billions winning the war. Now they were spending billions rebuilding their defeated enemies. The economics made no sense from a German perspective. Why help those you just defeated? But Richter understood. This was the same principle as the Red Ball Express feeding POWs. America had enough that generosity was possible. More than that, generosity was strategic. A rebuilt Germany would be a stable Germany, a democratic Germany, a Germany that would not start another war. The Marshall Plan was logistics on a grand scale, using American abundance to reshape European politics. In 1952, Richter was invited to lecture at a rebuilt military academy. West Germany was being rearmed as part of NATO, and the new German military wanted to learn from past mistakes. Richter was asked to speak about logistics and supply operations. He was 60 years old, gray and worn, but he accepted. Standing before young German officers, many of them sons of men he had served with, Richter made a decision. He would tell them the truth. Not the comfortable truth about tactics and strategy, the hard truth about ideology and economics. "Gentlemen," he began, "I am going to tell you why we lost the war. Not because our tactics were inferior, not because we were betrayed, not because of bad luck or winter weather or any of the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. We lost because we fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power in the 20th century." He told them about the Red Ball Express, about truck drivers delivering supplies across France, about the abundance that made American victory inevitable, about the racial ideology that blinded Germany to reality, about Sergeant Jackson from Alabama who drove 20-hour shifts and kept an army moving, about the Coca-Cola trucks and the wasted food and the replaced engines instead of repaired ones.
We believed power came from will, from ideology, from racial purity, from military discipline. We were wrong. Power in the modern world comes from industrial capacity, from economic abundance, from systems that work. The Red Ball Express was not elegant. It was not efficient in the German sense, but it worked. It delivered impossible amounts of supplies over impossible distances, using men we had been taught to dismiss as inferior. And it worked because America had enough trucks, enough fuel, enough food, enough everything that even an imperfect system could succeed through sheer abundance. The room was silent. Some officers looked uncomfortable. Some looked angry. Some looked thoughtful. You want to know how to build a strong military? Build a strong economy first. You want to know how to win wars? Don't start them unless you understand your opponent's industrial capacity. You want to know how to avoid another catastrophe like the one we just survived? Never ever let ideology blind you to reality. The men of the Red Ball Express taught me that lesson. Most of them were Black American soldiers who faced discrimination in their own country, but performed with excellence anyway. They were better soldiers than I was, better men than I was, and admitting that is the beginning of wisdom. After the lecture, a young captain approached Richter. "Sir, with respect, you sound defeatist. Surely German military excellence still means something?" Richter looked at him with tired eyes. "German military excellence got 60 million people killed and left our cities in ruins. What good is excellence in service of lies? The Americans were not excellent in the German sense. They were practical. They solved problems. They adapted. They used whoever could do the job, regardless of race or class. That flexibility, that willingness to be imperfect but effective, that's what beat us. And that's what we need to learn. By the 1960s, West Germany was prosperous again. The economic miracle had rebuilt cities, created jobs, and made Germans wealthy again. Richter worked as a civilian logistics consultant, helping German companies compete in international markets. He taught them American methods, standardization, efficiency through abundance, just-in-time delivery. Young Germans born after the war asked him what it had been like. Richter found these conversations difficult. How do you explain to someone born in peace and prosperity what it was like to watch your entire worldview collapse? How do you explain that their grandfather's generation had believed monstrous lies and paid a terrible price? He tried. He told them about Sergeant Jackson, about the Red Ball Express, about learning that everything you believed was false. Some understood. Some didn't want to hear it. Some accused him of being too critical of Germany. But Richter kept telling the story because he believed it mattered. The lessons of the Red Ball Express were not just military, they were moral. In 1965, Richter did something he had thought about for years. He wrote a letter to the U.S. Army, asking if they could help him locate James Jackson of Alabama. The Army's Veteran Affairs Office eventually responded with an address. Jackson was alive, living in Birmingham, working as the owner of an auto repair shop. Richter wrote him a letter. It took weeks to compose. He tried to express what the experience had meant, what he had learned, how it had changed his life. He asked about Jackson's life, his experiences returning to segregated America, whether the country had changed. Jackson wrote back. His letter was brief but warm. He was married with 3 children. His auto shop was successful. Alabama was changing, slowly, painfully, with violence and resistance, but changing. The civil rights movement was forcing America to confront its own contradictions. Funny thing, Jackson wrote, we proved ourselves in the war, but we still had to fight for basic rights when we got home. But we're winning that fight now, same as we won the fight in France. It just takes longer when the enemy is your own country. Richter's grandson, Thomas, was 16 and studying World War II in school. He came to Richter with questions about the war, about what his grandfather had done, about what it had been like. This was the conversation Richter had been waiting for. They sat in Richter's small apartment in Munich, rebuilt now, modern, nothing like the villa of his youth. Richter took out a box he had kept for over 20 years. Inside was the Red Ball Express patch, his old notebook, a photograph taken at the POW camp, and letters from Sergeant Jackson. Thomas, I want to tell you about the war. Not the version in your textbooks, the real version. The version about what I learned from a black truck driver from Alabama named James Jackson. He told the boy everything. About the ideology he had believed, about the assumptions he had made, about watching an endless stream of trucks destroy those assumptions, about learning that power comes not from ideology but from abundance, about discovering that men he had been taught to dismiss as inferior were in fact superior in every way that mattered. The Red Ball Express didn't just deliver supplies, Thomas. It delivered the truth. The truth that racist ideology is not just morally wrong, it's strategically idiotic. The truth that underestimating people based on race or class or any other category is a failure of intelligence, not superiority. The truth is that the modern world belongs to those who can organize, produce, and deliver, not those who can theorize about racial purity.
Thomas listened, wide-eyed. "Did you ever see Sergeant Jackson again?" "No, we write letters. That's enough. He has his life, I have mine. But I think about him often. I think about what he and men like him accomplished. And I think about what that says about everything we thought we knew."
What should I learn from this, Opa? Richter thought carefully. Learn that abundance is more powerful than ideology. Learn that practical solutions beat elegant theories. Learn that people you dismiss might be the ones who defeat you. Learn that seeing reality clearly is more important than defending what you want to believe. And learn that sometimes your enemies teach you more than your friends. In 1970, at age 68, Richter was interviewed for an oral history project documenting German experiences in World War II. The interviewer asked him what the most important lesson of the war had been. Richter was silent for a long time, organizing his thoughts. "The most important lesson?" he finally said. "The Red Ball Express. That's my answer, and it sounds strange, but it's true. Not the battles, not the tactics. A supply operation run by men we had been taught to view as inferior. That's what taught me the most important lessons of my life." He paused, then continued. "You see, war is supposed to be about courage and tactics and leadership. But World War II wasn't decided by any of those things. It was decided by economics and logistics, by which side could produce more trucks and fuel them and drive them longer distances, by which side could feed its soldiers and its enemies, by which side could waste resources because it had so many. Germany lost that competition before the war even started. We just didn't know it. But here's the deeper lesson. Nazi ideology told us we were superior. It told us that racial purity made us stronger. It told us that our enemies were weak and degenerate. And all of it, every single bit, was proven false by truck drivers from Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi. Men who faced discrimination in their own country but performed with excellence anyway. Men who did impossible things because those things needed doing. Men who showed more courage and competence than most German officers I knew. So what did I learn? I learned that seeing reality clearly is the foundation of everything else. I learned that abundance beats ideology every time. I learned that underestimating people based on race or class or nationality is not just morally wrong, it's a strategic disaster. I learned that the men who win wars are often not the ones getting credit. And I learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to finally see the truth. The interviewer asked one final question. "Do you have any regrets?" Richter smiled sadly. "I regret that it took defeat and captivity to teach me what should have been obvious from the start. I regret the years I wasted believing lies. I regret that millions had to die before people like me finally opened our eyes. But I'm grateful, and yes, it's strange to say this, I'm grateful for those 2 years as a POW. Grateful for meeting Sergeant Jackson. Grateful for watching the Red Ball Express prove everything I believed was wrong. Because that experience made me a wiser man, even if the price of that wisdom was humiliation and defeat." The interview ended, and Richter returned to his apartment. He took out the old photograph from 1944, a group photo of American soldiers and German POWs at the depot where he had worked. In the photo, you can see Richter, young and uncertain, standing next to Sergeant Jackson, who is smiling slightly, confident even in the casual snapshot. Richter had kept this photo for 26 years. He would keep it until he died. Sometimes he looked at it and felt shame for what he had believed. Sometimes he looked at it and felt gratitude for what he had learned. Mostly, he looked at it and thought about Jackson, wondered if he was well,
hoped that America had finally recognized what men like him had accomplished. Richter died in 1978 at age 76. Among his possessions, his family found the box with the Red Ball Express patch, the notebook, and the letters from Jackson. His will included a request: "Send the patch and my last letter to James Jackson in Birmingham, Alabama. He should have it. He earned it. Tell him I never forgot. Tell him he taught a foolish old German the most important lessons of his life." The family honored the request. Jackson received the package in late 1978. He kept the patch and Richter's letter. Years later, Jackson's grandson asked about the German general who had written to his grandfather. Jackson explained the story, about the war, about the Red Ball Express, about teaching an enemy to see the truth. "Did you forgive him?" the grandson asked, "for what the Nazis did?" Jackson thought about it. "Forgive? I don't know about forgiveness. But I respected him. He admitted he was wrong. He learned. He changed. Not many men can do that. He saw Negro soldiers accomplish what his people said was impossible, and instead of making excuses, he accepted the truth. That takes courage. Different kinds of courage than driving under fire, but courage all the same." What do you want people to remember about the Red Ball Express? Jackson smiled. "I want them to remember that regular people did impossible things. That black soldiers kept armies moving even though our own country didn't treat us right. That logistics wins wars as much as fighting. But mostly, I want them to remember that what someone tells you is impossible ain't always impossible. Sometimes it's just impossible for them to imagine it. We imagined it, then we did it, and in doing it, we changed history. That's worth remembering." The story of General Major Klaus Richter and the Red Ball Express offers profound lessons that transcend its World War II setting. Real power in the modern world comes not from ideology or rhetoric, but from economic capacity and logistics competence. Abundance enables options that scarcity makes impossible.
When ideology contradicts observable reality, ideology will lose. The Red Ball Express proved every assumption of Nazi racial theory false, not through argument, but through accomplishment. Dismissing people based on race, class, or background is not just morally wrong, it's strategically catastrophic. The inferior soldiers of the Red Ball Express defeated the superior Wehrmacht. History often credits the wrong people. Generals get glory, while truck drivers win wars. The Red Ball Express was essential to Allied victory, yet its story was largely forgotten for decades. People can change, even when their entire worldview collapses. Richter's transformation from Nazi officer to someone who understood and taught the truth shows that learning is possible even after terrible mistakes. The Red Ball Express succeeded not through perfect planning, but through relentless execution. When problems arose, drivers solved them and kept moving. Sometimes success comes from refusing to accept that something is impossible. The men who kept the Red Ball Express rolling returned to an America that still denied them basic rights. They proved themselves essential to defeating fascism, then had to fight for civil rights at home. Their story reminds us that injustice persists even in victory. The Red Ball Express teaches us to see reality clearly, to value competence over ideology, to recognize contribution wherever it comes from, and to understand that the people doing essential work are often not the ones receiving credit. In a world still struggling with racism, nationalism, and ideological blindness, these lessons remain urgently relevant. As Richter learned, sometimes your enemies teach you more than your friends. Sometimes defeat reveals truth that victory obscures. And sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, like a truck driver from Alabama who just kept rolling, no matter what anyone said was impossible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.
And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.